Hi. So my name's Stefan Krawczyk. So excited to talk to you today a little bit on how you can get some higher ROI out of your kind of MLOps, and I think also this applies to LLMOps initiatives. So just to understand a bit more about who I'm talking to, so raise your hands here. Raise your hands if you're thinking about some sort of MLOps or LLMOps initiative. You're thinking about implementing something. Okay, who's actually implementing it right now or doing something about it? Who's been doing that for a year or more? Okay, who's been doing that for 2 years or more? Okay, 5? Okay, so there's a few storms. Okay. Who here is from the management side of things? Okay. Who here's on the technical side? Okay, so more technical. Okay, cool. So hopefully I'll have something for each of you on this talk. But in terms of context about myself, how I find myself here, so I've been thinking about data machine learning platform systems for over a decade. From New Zealand, hence the accent, but I've been in Silicon Valley my entire career. I'm currently the CEO of a company called DAGWorks, which is commercializing an open source package called Hamilton that I created at Stitch Fix. But for the purpose of this talk, my experience, I've been thinking and using platforms for a while, and I've transitioned into really building them and really trying to help other people with their kind of MLOps and machine learning kind of processes. Most famously, I was at Stitch Fix, where, for those who don't know Stitch Fix, they were famous for having a data science org, over 100 data scientists. I was part of the platform team there, where I was trying to build tooling and infrastructure to help them. What was unique was that data scientists at Stitch Fix had to prototype, productionize, and then be on call for what they plug back into the business. I was trying to provide the tooling and infrastructure to make that happen in a self-service manner. And hence, where most of these lessons come from today. I kind of mentioned, my background has been on platforms, and so just kind of an assumption for me, like any ops initiatives, whether it's DevOps, LLMOps, or MLOps, I kind of find it equivalent to a platform initiative. So when I say platform, I mean something that you can elevate something and then build some sort of standardized process on top of. And so for me, any ops initiative is very equivalent to platform, because a platform is also a very tactical way of writing some code to potentially implement some sort of process. Just to kind of ensure we're on the same field here. So would you be thinking about some sort of ops process or platform process? Well, delivering sustained value over time is hard without some good abstractions. It's easy to get a machine learning model to production, but then iterating on it, having different people come and go, your environment changing. It's hard to ensure that you have sustained kind of processes and work without some good abstractions. Some reasons for this is, one, you might have a lot of repetitive tasks. So you create a model, you serialize it, then need to deploy it. Maybe if you standardize or have some process, you can simplify that into one step. If you have to contend with things like GDPR, if people do things in very different ways, you would want them to do it in some sort of standardized way. So hence a process or a platform can help you with that. Classically, if you have multiple teams who are doing the same work, a classic case for this is why you bring in a feature store. So if you build some sort of platform or process where you centralize something, you can kind of reduce the amount of work for both teams. And then something that is more true today than it was, say, 5 years ago, is that there's a lot of point solutions, in which case getting to production means sticking together a bunch of point solutions, in which case that workflow and experience could be a little janky, in which case one way that you can simplify it is build some sort of process or platform that helps unify and standardize and make that development experience better. Now, these are very technical, kind of, I'm an engineer by heart, of reasons why. But if a CEO was to come to me and say, why are you pushing for this process, or why do you want to build a platform? And the one word answer that I would say is leverage, right? The point of these kind of things is that you do some work that then you get a lot of leverage off down the line. So you put in a bunch of effort, and then it will repair itself over time by standardizing, simplifying, or smoothing out various things in your MLOps or LLMOps process. So let's talk about increasing your ROI. The asterisk here on ROI is because if you're doing these platform or process kind of things, inherently the way you measure yourself is a little bit fuzzy. Who here feels that they have a good metric to measure themselves on their platform or ops processes? No one. Expected response, right? So it's very hard to measure yourself, or at least tie yourself to business metrics generally when you're doing these processes, right? And so in which case, take these lessons that I'm going to say with a grain of salt, depending on your context, right? Because it might be a little different. Since, in some of these cases, return on investment is purely perception. In others, it's more, tactical, like how, given some engineering resources, how can I make better use of them? And so the lesson breakdown roughly falls into 3 areas. So users, what to build, and kind of technical approaches, which will be more tactical. The first one is users. So if you don't have a good metric to measure yourself, one of the best things to measure yourself against is adoption. So how many users do you have using your process or your platform? And so that's what these two kind of lessons kind of relate to. The first lesson, high level, focus on adoption, not completeness. So it's very easy when you're building some sort of platform initiative to try to build everything, right? And so much like maybe trying to build a house and not being able to move into it until it's fully complete, I want to say that's probably not a good approach. So who here has tried to build their own feature store? A few, right? To me, it's very easy in that sort of a project to scope something where it's like you can't get anything until you've made it work for every possible use case. I want to say instead, in terms of an ROI perspective, especially from a perception one, it's better to try to do what the picture on the right is doing. Try to find some minimal viable build a room that someone can use, and then continue to build out the rest of the house. And that's because I think from a Stitch Fix, people would get fired if they spent a quarter building something and no one would end up using it. And so in which case, I think it's important for these processes, right, that you focus on trying to get adoption as quickly as possible. Very much akin to a startup trying to find product market fit. I want to say it's very similar for these processes. My two favorite tactics for doing this, one is adopt existing user tooling or partner very closely with the team. So what do I mean by adopting existing user tooling? There is invariably someone in your organization who has built something for themselves to make their process easier. Find those people and see if there's something you can inherit. A good case for this is, if there's one team that has something and another team wants, a good case for investing time and trying to standardize and make that better. Why is this a good idea? Well, if you can inherit something that someone already is using and built and wants, right, you've kind of de-risked what to build. You de facto have some users, right? So you can show hey, look, I did something, or I've inherited something, made it better, and we have users. And then from the story of telling why you're doing this and what business value, because someone built it and it shows value in their process, right? It should be very easy then for you to make an extension to say, why investing in this is going to be even better for you and the business. So, for example, making Team B now use this instead of only just Team A. Caveats, though, is you should ensure that you're investing in something that has a bigger picture. So if only one person's using it and no one else is likely to use it, probably not a good candidate for adopting. And then otherwise, people from a personal perspective, right? People get attached to the things that they build. So just be aware of any kind of don't come in and just steal or rip something from someone, because invariably engineers or people who build things get attached to the things they build. So make sure you play that. Nicely with them. Tactic number 2 is partner very closely with the team for a specific use case. So much like in this picture, rather than trying to build the whole house, try to find someone you can build a room for while you continue to build out the rest of your vision. The ideal here is the narrow use case. So in the case of a feature store, right, rather than trying to make it work for all teams all at once, find a team with that specific use case, right? That team should ideally have a deadline, so you can kind of work towards it. So the idea being you build it, they're immediately going to adopt it. And then from a project management perspective, if you can build it with them, that's a great way to bring them along, get feedback early, make sure you're building the right thing. And so then the goal for this by the end of it is that you have users, right? And then you have the story of the users partnering with you. They can also be your advocates for what value you're bringing and what you've smoothed over or what you've simplified and made easier. Lesson 2, though, is all your users are not equal. So it's a bit, contra to what I just said. This is more of the case of you have built something and now you're trying to figure out what to do next. Because invariably, you're going to have someone come up to you and go, hey, can you help me with this kind of process, right? Because especially as an engineer, it's very tempting to think that all your users are equally valuable to you, and all their feature requests are also equally burdensome on your platform in terms of development and maintenance cost. That's kind of not true, right? Your users fall on a spectrum, right, in terms of value and skill set. So maybe this normal plot should actually be, three-dimensional. And then also the requests that they have for you aren't all equal either, since one feature request might be easy to implement, another might be, easy to implement but much harder to maintain. So you have to take those two things into account. And so in which case, once you have something, don't be afraid to be, don't be egalitarian is effectively the message, right? And so what that means, in effect, is really you have to learn when to say no. And so at Stitch Fix, one of the things was very smart people. They wanted to come and try to do something that was speculative, not core to the business. Is generally a good idea to say no to them, right? Because your exec team, invariably the business rewards things that are much closer to the business. So if you're doing some platform work or some process work that's helping something on the periphery, it's a little bit risky from an ROI perspective of whether you should kind of do that. So my advice here is learn to say no. And then the other is if you have someone who's sophisticated. So what do I mean here is that they are a pretty good engineer. So part of the question is if the request they come to you with, can they build it themselves? If the answer is yes, and in general it's probably something complex. If it's something complex, then it's probably a good idea to also say no. Since if they can build it and prove out the value first, then you don't have to do that for them, right? And so if the ask leads to failure, good news, you didn't spend time on it, right? You spent your time on something more valuable. But then if the ask leads to success, right, then this gives you an actual plan or something on your roadmap that you could potentially come in and adopt and make better. And so in which case, de-risk potentially of what you should invest in next. So a classic example of this latter case is something you said no to something on the periphery that becomes successful. Now the business invests in it. Now then you have a good case to spend time there. So lesson 3, what to build. Who here has product management support on their platform or process initiatives? A few of you. So yeah, very common case that if you're doing any of this stuff, you don't actually have product management support. So this lesson, if you do have product management support, hopefully they're kind of doing this. Otherwise, if you don't, this is something that you need to kind of build into your process. So the way that I like to think about it is that you should try to live your user's lifecycle, right? So really understand, their full kind of workflow end to end of what they're kind of trying to do and accomplish. Because if you're given resources and you need to invest, you need to know where to invest time, right? And so effectively, if you don't know what they're doing, then how do you know what's a good place to kind of invest your efforts? And then you might be really focused on trying to make it really have a great production SLA. But if you've made it an order of magnitude harder to get from development to production, right, and you don't know about it, then people aren't going to have the greatest perception of you and your platform. They're going to see it as a roadblock to getting things out to production. So you should be able to understand that and therefore also potentially mitigate it with the efforts that you're doing. And so the way that I like to think about it is really if you can build empathy for what your users are doing and what you're helping streamline or build out with a process or a platform, right? And the best way that I like to do it is to, pick your metaphor, but, drink your own champagne or eat your own dog food. So be an end user of what you're building, right? And so if you can be an end user of what you're building, then you can potentially see better things of hey, I can tweak this, hey, I can make this better, right? But that's not always true. Maybe the domain expertise is really kind of a bit far removed, and you can't do that. In which case, at Stitch Fix, we had success with, having rotation. So we potentially brought in an end user to be part of the team for a bit. They provided the kind of end user perspective and kind of provided that, help the team build empathy for the problem that was being, process being improved. And then somewhat obviously, build relationships, right? So this is something that a product manager generally takes care of, but if you don't, right, most people are more receptive to change if, you have a relationship with them, right? And so if you're trying to make it, improve processes in a way that production doesn't break, right? Bring people along. part of that is, you have to build a relationship, and then through that relationship, you can kind of, ask the questions of, what kind of problems do you have? How can I solve them better? Like, what part of your process is, challenging, right? And a lot of people, especially data scientists I work with, actually kind of assume the tools are given, that they're fixed, that they can't change them, right? And so without a relationship and asking the question, right, you're not going to get that feedback and perspective. And so if you can get that, then you can tie that into your quarterly, your planning process, right? Bring them in, feel them, bring them, like what I saw while I work at Stitch Fix is if you bring the teams into your planning process, you make them feel heard, they're far more likely to then adopt what you're trying to push out because they feel they were part of the kind of the decision-making process. Cool, all right, I'm going super fast, all right. So these last two lessons are more tactical, right? And so what I mean by that is really kind of, I'm going to show a little bit of code, but really talk about, how potentially you design some sort of platform to help fill out these processes. So lesson 4. I'm pretty sure every MLOps vendor downstairs won't like me telling this, but basically, don't let your users couple directly to vendor APIs. There are so many vendors these days, so many point solutions, right? And so say you have a problem, say a feature store, or you have model observability, or now with LLM Ops, there's like so many tools, right? It's very tempting and very easy to go pull that one thing off the shelf and go, that will solve our problem, go ahead, go use it, right? I think that's great from showing short-term value and getting something out, but inherently though, like if you do that, then your users will integrate those particular tools, but say you want to change something out, or the LLM Ops space is changing so quickly, you want something better, but now you have vendor lock-in. And with that, then you have a high kind of change management cost to kind of bring something new in, right? And so at Stitch Fix, we brought an observability vendor in, right? We used to give data scientists direct access to AWS in terms of the things that they could do. We found that there was a management nightmare if we wanted to change or update certain things, and so in which case we learned to kind of wrap things. So my advice is, if you bring in a vendor or expose things, right, is you should really try to wrap the API and try not to leak what you're using underneath. So the example here is I have of some code that is effectively just serializing a model and storing it in an S3 bucket, right? Pretty simple kind of stuff, but instead you should try to wrap it in your own kind of platform library so you can hide the internals. And so the case being here that if you have a vendor, right, you can then wrap it with your own kind of library, say saving an LLM prompt or something, you haven't exposed who it is. So in which case, if you want to rip it out, right, you control that code, and in which case the migration cost or the cost to change something is much lower than it otherwise would be. And one of the optional things that you can kind of do is that usually with these APIs, you've got to make decisions, and so you can also then potentially go ahead and simplify it and standardize potentially a few things by providing this kind of wrapper. The benefits to you in terms of ROI, right, is that it's more of a, not a short-term play, it's more of like the medium to long-term, is that you will have less tech debt to contend with, right? And therefore also, if you want to switch something out, it's going to be much easier and faster. Lesson 5 is effectively taking what I just said, but taking it to the extreme and really thinking it more holistically about what you're trying to build out in terms of processes. And so I term it the 2-layer API trick. As a platform team, it was very common and tempting as an engineer to think about, if you think about a usual diagram of this kind of sandwiches, is that you have your user code and then you're providing some sort of platform layer underneath. And it's a one single unified platform layer that has all the APIs that all your users might ever want to use and need. Instead, I want to say you should break that up into 2. Right? So you should have your users talk to a high-level API, and then you should have a foundational API underneath. So my house building analogy here is that the foundational API should be much like the foundation of a house. For a house, the foundation kind of bounds what you can kind of build on top, and so that's really kind of the metaphor that I'm going for, is that this foundational API is kind of sets the base level of what you can build on top of, and then you're building high-level things on top of that based off that API. And so the foundational API, right, allows anyone to build anything, but in a bounded way. And this really isn't the, the primary user is actually yourself. So if you have a platform team where you're trying to build out these processes, this is really you trying to provide potentially even, like in lesson 4, like this is where the layer that you're potentially wrapping vendor APIs, right? And you're providing some sort of base level foundation of like what you can do with your systems and processes, right? And this is that kind of layer. The higher level API, that's the one you want to give your users. The goal here is to simplify kind of the experience of kind of building things. And it's one of the kind of the key assumptions though is that built solely off your kind of foundational API, right? And so this higher level API, for example, is like one line to save and deploy model, right? So rather than having two, right, you can simplify it. Or if you have, in the LLM ops stuff, like, one line to save and version or prompt or stuff like that. So at Stitch Fix, just to give an example, we built a configuration-driven model kind of pipeline. The story behind this, we actually inherited it we took it over, we adopted it from another team and made it kind of more general. But effectively, the principles of how we kind of designed the system is that it was built on top of the configuration-driven model pipeline was our high-level API. That was built on top of two primitives, what we call the model envelope, which was just a wrapper around S3 and RDS for serializing models. And also a wrapper API around Airflow in terms of creating pipelines. And so this kind of worked well for us at Stitch Fix because we could change things in the foundational API, but the people's pipelines didn't have to change if we wanted to switch around, what bucket we particularly save things to, or if we wanted to do a database migration or some database stuff. Like people didn't have to change their pipelines, and so this actually helped our team move faster since we didn't have to hold people's hands to migrate something since we had this kind of two-level layer of abstraction. We also, the example here, I also want to emphasize that this foundational API doesn't have to be something that you provide. You could also use something off the shelf. So Fast API is a web service. It has a kind of a bounded set of APIs. So you can think of the foundational API as also things from open source that you can kind of build together. So at Stitch Fix, one of the other examples we had was we enabled people to write a Python function, provide some configuration, and then you could deploy it as a microservice pretty easily. Underneath, they didn't know, it was all using Fast API and Docker, but the users didn't really have to interact with that too much. So if you wanted to change something about Docker or upgrade the version of Fast API, the users really didn't have to do much since the platform team could kind of control it. Cool. So in terms of the benefits, right? Overall, I think this will enable you to kind of move more quickly and more nimbly, right? So less of a short-term play, more of a kind of medium to long-term, since tech debt is the thing that really kills you and it kills your processes and platforms. And really, the reason why is that this helps you, reduce your coupling, right? So your foundational API is the thing that couples to where things run and what things are, whereas the high-level API is more of the semantics of what you do with your system. In which case, this helps, help reduce. The tech debt maintenance that invariably occurs. So, for example, switching a vendor or something shouldn't be, touching only the foundational API, not the high-level one. In lesson 2, where I said say no to sophisticated users, well, this actually provides an escape hatch, right? So, if you have a sophisticated user and they come to you, you're like, no, I don't want to support that in the high-level API, but you're capable enough. Here, go ahead. Why don't you build it on top of our foundational API? This then, bounds kind of what they do, but then also gives you a much easier way to kind of then adopt what they're doing and bring it in potentially to your higher level API as a first-class thing. And then from a user perspective, right, being able to separate things into two actually gives you, two different mindsets, right? And so the higher level API is something that then you can focus on really trying to simplify the experience, so reduce decisions people need to make, in which case can help with user adoption and really simplifying time to value that they see getting out of the processes that you're trying to implement. So onto the summary, right? So hopefully I've imbued in you 5 lessons. So key takeaways are build for immediate adoption, right? And the reason is this from a perception standpoint that If you can show value sooner, then people are going to be much happier with exec team gave you money and resources, right? If you can show people are using it more sooner, you can also you can point to kind of progress. But invariably you're going to then have to make choices, right? And therefore be strategic. So don't build for every user equally. Be selective as to like who you're really targeting. So then you make sure you're actually getting the right ROI. Build empathy, because you generally don't have too much product management support, and the best way to understand therefore the problem and what to build is to really understand what is impactful, what's hurting, what the users are struggling with, right, or what are problems. And then from a tactical perspective, right, try not to expose vendor APIs directly, right? Wrap them if you can. This will help reduce your tech debt and switching costs. And then from a two-layer API perspective, right, really think about providing some sort of foundational API and then a high-level API on top, right? And so again, helps with the tech debt, your team's iteration speed, and then also decreasing the amount of time someone needs to kind of get value of what you're doing. And otherwise, if you want to see some of this in action and some of these thoughts, like Hamilton does imbue some of these kind of philosophies, and then you can also check out what I'm building at DAGWorks.io. But otherwise, I have moded through this talk much faster than I had been practicing. So happy to take a lot of questions. I have a blog that you can kind of subscribe to. Otherwise, more than happy to connect on Twitter or LinkedIn. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Stefan?
Yeah. Or things you want me to repeat because I went way too fast.
Okay, so at the risk of leading the witness here, I just wanted to get your take in leaky abstractions.
Yep.
And how you think about them in this particular context. Furthermore, how do you think about creating these abstractions in a world of LLM ops where things just change so rapidly fast that I'm never really going to build that V2 and swap out my underlying solution?
Yeah, so if I understand the question, so how do I, leaky abstractions, but then also in the context of the world of how quickly things are moving. Yeah, I mean, I think there's also, when you're developing POCs, like, this is the common question, right? Do you develop something to show value and then you spend time rebuilding it, or do you take that POC and try to ship it to production, right? And so I want to say, if you're taking that POC and want to ship it to production, you should probably think about, the leaky abstraction of not trying to expose too much. So because invariably you're going to want to then iterate, and if you really want to invest in it over time, make it easier, then you probably want to kind of invest, the extra 10% potentially that it takes to reduce that leaky abstraction. But if it's, you just want to do a POC, then like, sure, do whatever's faster so you can show to the exec or whoever that like, hey, this has value and we should invest in it. But obviously, contextually, it really depends on which way you're going to do that. My cynicism is that everyone says they want to take the POC, everyone says they're going to rewrite it, but they don't, right? So my philosophy is always, it's a bit like, broken windows theory. If you can start well and have it well thought out from the beginning, then it's much easier to continue that through. And so in which case I would say like, it takes a bit of cultural shift and mindset to kind of implement well, but take the time to try to do that from the beginning is my advice.
Any other questions?
Could you put slides back?
I don't know, because they just changed the slides.
What was the question? I mean,
I think that's one of your summary points.
Yep.
And then you were summarizing. One was, you were summarizing how you do everything on the web and how you do
Yep.
And then the next one was also very interesting because you were summarizing everything, but
Sure. I guess, yeah. I guess you want the slide to ask a question. Is that the way to interpret what you said? Or?
yeah, well, there you go.
I guess I didn't hear a question. Sorry, I'm trying to.
So you were. It wasn't that somewhere on the. I'm sorry. I really like your last two slides. In one of your slides, you were summarizing everything that you had said. It was about how how you do the 2 layers of API example, the
Yeah.
2-layer APIs. That was great. And then you came up with one more after that, and it was also a summarizing slide that, yeah, it seemed interesting, but it went really quick.
Sure. Sorry. I can zoom through it. Okay. This one?
The next one.
Next one? Yes.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Questions?
I think that kind of brings us to time. Anyway, thank you very much, Stefan, and thank you very much for everyone.